My name is Olivia, and my childhood was filled with privileges most people could only dream of. Our home was something straight out of a glossy magazine, with spacious rooms, a manicured lawn, and a pool that hosted countless summer parties. Every detail of our lifestyle reflected my father's success in business. He took pride in it and never let us forget how hard he had worked to achieve it. "Olivia, darling, remember that everything we have is the result of hard work," he would say, his voice a mix of authority and pride. I nodded, trying to absorb the lesson, though at that age, I was more interested in playing with my cousin Patricia than reflecting on the value of money. Patricia was more than just a cousin to me. She was almost like a sister, only a year younger. The daughter of my Uncle Kevin, my father's younger brother, she was often at our house. Our families were inseparable, though the contrast between their situation and ours was evident, even to a child. "Uncle Kevin's family needs support," my mother would explain whenever I noticed my father writing yet another check for them. "Family takes care of family, Olivia." Mom had a way of easing any awkward moments that arose when Uncle Kevin accepted financial help. She was a master of diplomacy, always finding the right words to make everything seem natural. Patricia and I shared everything: clothes, secrets, dreams. We spent hours in my room discussing plans for the future. "We'll go to college together," Patricia would say, lying on my bed and staring at the ceiling. "And then we'll live in neighboring apartments. Our kids will be best friends too." When graduation came, my father made a generous gesture that strengthened our bond. "Both my girls deserve the best education," he said, announcing that he would pay for both my tuition and Patricia's. My mother stood beside him, her face glowing with pride. In that moment, I just smiled, taking it for granted. Patricia, whose eyes filled with tears of gratitude, looked as if she had been given the entire world. We eagerly packed for college, convinced we were going to conquer the world together. Our friendship seemed unshakable. "Nothing will ever come between us, right, Olivia?" Patricia would ask cheerfully, helping me decorate my dorm room. "Of course," I replied, believing it with all my heart. How naive we were. So sure that life would always be perfect, we failed to notice the small cracks in its foundation. College flew by faster than we had expected. Soon, I stood on stage receiving my diploma, with my family cheering in the crowd. I felt on top of the world. Patricia and I were still inseparable, though our lives began to take different directions. She grew more drawn to the idea of traveling, while I focused on building my career. We told each other it was fine, our paths would always cross again. But everything changed in an instant, like a bolt of lightning on a clear day. A wedding gift, so beautiful and symbolic at first glance, became the beginning of the end of our friendship. At the time, of course, I couldn't grasp the full depth of what was happening. Patricia and I, as usual, were chatting about the details, laughing, and planning our next trip. She seemed happy, as though everything in her life was perfectly in place. "This is going to be amazing, Olivia," she squealed, picking out decor for her new house. Her enthusiasm was infectious. I believed nothing could ever break our bond. But hidden tensions, unspoken words, and the things we had ignored for so long began to surface. All the perfection we had believed in for so long turned out to be an illusion. I quickly found a job in the marketing department, determined to prove to myself and everyone else that I could live independently. It seemed like everything was falling into place. Well, almost everything. "Dad," I said one evening over dinner, trying to keep my voice calm, "I'm thinking about getting my own place." I had been browsing apartment listings online, dreaming of a cozy space that was entirely mine. Images were already forming in my head: a small kitchen, a bright living room, maybe even a chair by the window. "The rental market is crazy right now, but if I could manage the down payment," I began, but my father interrupted me before I could even set my fork down. "Olivia," he said, his tone stern, though his eyes carried that familiar mix of disappointment and conviction, You're an independent woman now. You have a good job. It's time for you to stand on your own 2 feet. Your mother and I gave you a great education, but now it's your turn to make your own way." Mom sat beside him, silently nodding in agreement. Her face remained soft, but her gaze was unreadable. I felt as though I had been struck. My father's words dragged me down, like a stone tied to my feet. But there was nothing to do but nod in response. And so I found myself in a tiny one-bedroom apartment. Watching my savings dwindle painfully slowly, I learned to budget, paying half my salary on rent. In my dreams, having my own place had seemed like an oasis of independence, but the reality was far harsher. Still, I was determined to prove that I could manage on my own. A year later, Patricia graduated from college, and we celebrated at her favorite restaurant. During dinner, she suddenly lit up the room with her joy, beaming more brightly than ever. "Jake proposed to me," she exclaimed, extending her hand to show off a large diamond ring. "We're getting married in 4 months." 4 months passed in a whirlwind of preparations. I threw myself into my duties as a bridesmaid, helping Patricia pick out a dress, flowers, and decor. My own housing struggles faded into the background. I was genuinely happy for her, even if I occasionally felt a small pang of envy at her happiness. Then came the wedding day. Everything was perfect. The ceremony took place in a luxurious church adorned with white roses, and the reception was elegant and refined, just like everything Patricia touched. I watched her dance with Jake to a romantic melody. Their faces glowed with happiness, and I smiled as I looked at them. Then my father stood to give a toast. His voice wavered with emotion, which was rare for him. "Patricia," he began, raising his glass, "you've been like a daughter to me all these years. Watching you grow up alongside Olivia has been one of the greatest joys of my life." I smiled, sipping my champagne, mentally noting how standard his toast sounded. But then he pulled an envelope from his pocket. "I want to give you something special," he continued, pausing for dramatic effect. "The keys to your own apartment." The glass slipped from my hand and shattered on the floor. The room erupted with gasps, applause, and cries of delight. Uncle Kevin and Aunt Sarah were openly crying. Patricia rushed to my father, hugging him so tightly that he nearly dropped the envelope. "Thank you. Thank you," she sobbed, clinging to his shoulder. "You deserve this," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "I love you like my own daughter." I sat at my desk, frozen like a statue, while a storm of emotions raged around me. Relatives swarmed Patricia and Jake, congratulating them on the incredible gift. In my mind, my father's words, the same father who once told me to stand on my own 2 feet, reverberated like a relentless echo. Keys. An apartment. My cousin, my sister, had just received from my father something I could only dream of. I grabbed my champagne glass, clutching it so tightly I feared it might crack. But I kept smiling, playing my role. After all, it was Patricia's day. I wasn't about to make a scene. I waited exactly 3 days after the wedding before I showed up at my parents' house. A torrent of conflicting emotions churned within me, but I knew I couldn't stay silent any longer. My hands trembled slightly as I rang the doorbell, but my voice was firm when my father opened the door. "We need to talk," I said, brushing past him into the living room where so many happy moments from my childhood had taken place. He sat in his favorite chair, looking completely at ease, as if he hadn't just dropped a bombshell at the wedding that turned my world upside down. "What's on your mind, Olivia?" he asked, glancing up at me. I remained standing, too agitated to sit down. "Are you really going to pretend you don't know what this is about?" I began. "You told me to stand on my own 2 feet, to earn my way, to be independent. But you just gave Patricia an apartment. Like it meant nothing." My father sighed, the sound heavy with the weariness of someone dealing with an unreasonable child. With Patricia, it's different, he said, folding his hands on his lap. She doesn't have the same opportunities you do. Different? I repeated, incredulous. We went to the same college, got the same education that you paid for. Olivia, she comes from a poor family, he continued, his brow furrowing slightly. Jake's family isn't wealthy either. Your uncle can't afford to help them get started. With today's housing prices, they'd never be able to save enough for a place of their own. I laughed sharply, though inside I was seething. And I can? I asked, defiant. So it's fine for me to work just to afford half a country in rent? Why can't they do the same? Rent an apartment like normal people. My father's posture stiffened, the calm mask he wore beginning to crack. You're being selfish, Olivia, he said, his voice hardening. This isn't about you. It's my money, and I decide how to spend it. I'm helping your uncle's family because they need it. This isn't about the money, Dad. My voice wavered with restrained anger. It's about fairness. How do you think it feels to see you treat your niece better than your own daughter? That's enough. My mother's voice cut through the room suddenly. She had entered so quietly I hadn't even realized she was home. Her face was tense, her gaze icy. How dare you question your father's decisions, she said. You have no right to tell him how to spend his money. I turned to face her, feeling a fresh wave of fury rising within me. And you're okay with this? I asked, not bothering to hide the sarcasm in my voice. Your husband gives another woman an apartment and tells his daughter to fight for herself? Don't you dare speak to me in that tone, young lady. Her voice rose, and her face flushed with anger. Your father has given you everything. And this is how you repay him? With jealousy and demands? Jealousy? I nearly shouted, my chest tightening with the weight of my pain and disappointment. This isn't about jealousy. It's about respect. About treating your children equally. Get out, my father said sharply, his voice now ice cold. Get out of my house until you can appreciate everything we've done for you and apologize for your behavior. Gladly, I shot back, grabbing my bag. And don't worry about doing anything for me anymore. I don't want your charity. Tears of anger burned in my eyes as I got into my car. It was never about the money. It had never been about the money. It was about the way my father leaned toward Patricia with an adoration I had always craved but never received. 5 years passed in a blur. In that time, I made monumental changes in my life. I worked tirelessly, building a career, eventually earning the title of senior client manager at my marketing firm. Every accomplishment, every milestone, was the result of my own hard work. I saved money with relentless determination, though the insane real estate market meant it was never enough for a down payment. But the most significant moment came when, during one of those days, I met Melvin. He entered my life during a business meeting with a client. Melvin was the creative director of the company we collaborated with, and his effortless confidence, sharp sense of humor, and genuine engagement in every conversation immediately caught my attention. Something just clicked the moment he looked at me, and I realized that this man could turn my world upside down. When he proposed, it was on an ordinary Tuesday evening. We were cooking dinner together in my tiny kitchen, and I was laughing, complaining about the overly spicy sauce. Melvin, suddenly serious, stopped what he was doing, pulled out a small box, and said, Olivia, you've made my life better in every way. Will you spend it with me? It was so simple, so sincere, that I didn't even hesitate in my response. That was the moment I knew I had finally found someone who would always put me first. We immediately began planning the wedding. We set the date for early summer, and I dove into the preparations with the same determination I brought to everything in my life. The venue was booked, the dress was chosen, and all the details were gradually falling into place. But the hardest part was creating the guest list. I spent hours at the kitchen table, poring over names, relationships, and connections as if trying to decode my own past. Despite my efforts to remain objective, one fact was undeniable: my parents and Patricia had no place there. I hadn't spoken to them in 5 years. After Patricia's wedding, our relationship had completely disintegrated. The final straw was a message from her on Facebook. "You're just jealous because I have a husband and an apartment, and you have neither. Maybe if you weren't so pretentious, you'd have those things by now." I blocked her after that. It was easier. Cleaner. I had built a new life, surrounded by people who valued me, and tried to forget the family that had made me feel like a second-class daughter. But rumors spread quickly, especially in families, even fractured ones like ours. One evening, I was sitting in my apartment, reviewing sketches of floral arrangements and debating between roses and peonies. Suddenly, my phone rang. My father's name flashed on the screen, and I froze. It was the first call in 5 years. My heart leapt to my throat, and my hands shook as I answered. "Olivia," my father's voice sounded older, wearier than I remembered. "I hear congratulations are in order." "Who told you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Does it matter?" he replied with a hint of irritation. "Why didn't you invite me to your wedding?" His voice softened, almost pleading. "I'm your father. I should be the one to walk you down the aisle." I exhaled a bitter laugh before I could stop myself. "Really, Dad? Now you want to play the father card?" My words were laced with sarcasm and pain. "Olivia," he began, but I cut him off, something inside me snapping. "Let's be honest, shall we? What's the plan? Are you going to gift me an apartment for my wedding? You know, like you did for Patricia?" Silence. It stretched so long that I thought he might have hung up. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Look, sweetheart, things haven't been going well lately. I can give you $5,000 for the wedding. That's a generous gift. You should be grateful." $5,000. After he had given Patricia an entire apartment. That old resentment rose in my throat, reminding me why I had severed ties with him in the first place. "Thank you for your generosity, Dad," I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "But keep your money." "I don't need it." The line went dead before he could respond. I stared at the phone, my hands trembling slightly. Was 5 years of silence better than this reminder of why I had cut contact in the first place? The next morning, a notification popped up on my phone. Robert Anderson shared a post. My heart sank as my father's name appeared on the screen. He rarely posted anything on social media, and even the sight of his name sent a cold knot to my stomach. My hands shook as I tapped to open the post. The text began with a chilling opening line. I never thought I'd have to write something like this about my own daughter. Each word burned me from the inside. Olivia has shown her true colors. She's demanding an apartment as a wedding gift, threatening not to invite me to her wedding unless I give in to her selfish and greedy behavior. It breaks my heart. I reread it over and over, barely able to believe that these words had been written by my father. Comments began appearing immediately, like a pack of ravenous predators descending on their prey. "Aunt Linda. How ungrateful can someone be? Cousin James. Some people never appreciate what they have." Even people I barely spoke to decided to weigh in. How can a daughter blackmail her father? This is disgusting. My fingers instinctively found the keyboard. Anger clouded my judgment as I typed. "It's a matter of principle. You gave my cousin an apartment for her wedding. Your own daughter at least deserves an explanation as to why she's treated differently." But my words didn't matter. The comments kept pouring in, each more condemning than the last. My hands trembled so much I could barely type, but something inside me had broken, something that had been smoldering for years. I opened a new post. Let me tell you a story that has haunted me for years. The words flowed without pause. I described a father who had always treated Patricia better than me. I recalled her lavish birthday parties and my modest family dinners. I mentioned the trips abroad where he would take Patricia shopping and buy her gifts I could never even dream of. Dad always gave her twice the allowance he gave me, I wrote. He paid for both of our educations, and I'm grateful for that. But when it came time to support me, he told me to stand on my own 2 feet, while gifting her an apartment. At her wedding, he even danced the first dance with her, not her own father. The more I think about it, the stranger it seems. I wouldn't even be surprised if Patricia turned out to be his real daughter. I hit post before I could stop myself. The screen glowed with the words I had just unleashed into the world. It was a bombshell. I knew that. And yet, strangely, I felt no regret. The fallout came quickly. Within hours, my phone was exploding with calls and messages. Some relatives immediately declared they wouldn't be attending my wedding. The first call came from my mother. Her voice rang with furious indignation. How could you do this to our family? Your father is devastated. We raised you better than this. Then came a call from my father. His rage was palpable, even through the phone. You've ruined our family name. To me, you're dead, he spat before hanging up. But the most venomous call came from Aunt Sarah. You're a jealous, ungrateful little girl, she hissed. How dare you accuse us? You just can't stand that Patricia is happy and you're not. Each word stung, but I couldn't stop now. This wasn't just an outburst of emotion. It was a desperate attempt to break free from the noose I had lived in for so many years, surrounded by pretense and inequity. The next morning, I woke up to a notification. Then came a message from Patricia. Congratulations on proving what a hysterical paranoid you've become. I pity your fiancé for marrying a delusional woman who invents nasty stories about her family just because she can't handle not being the center of attention. Don't worry about blocking me, I'll do it myself. I quietly blocked her, as well as everyone who left unpleasant comments or messages. The guest list for my wedding shrank considerably. I told myself it was for the best. Only Uncle Kevin remained a silent observer amidst the chaos, and his strange silence felt oddly comforting. The next 2 months of wedding preparations passed in a blur. Melvin was my rock throughout it all. He never questioned my decision to sever ties with my family. Instead, he supported me as I revised seating charts, canceled arrangements, and tried to piece together something that resembled the perfect day. Everything changed on one rainy evening. There was a knock at the door. When I opened it, I saw Uncle Kevin. He looked like he hadn't slept in days, dark circles under his eyes, an exhausted expression. Can I come in? He asked quietly. We need to talk. I had never seen him so broken. He sat down on the couch, his shoulders slumped heavily. His hands were clasped so tightly that his knuckles were white. Your post, he began, avoiding my eyes. What you wrote about how your father treated Patricia, it made me think. Really think about everything. His voice cracked. I remembered how he used to tell me about the early years of his marriage. How he was always around our family. He used to drive Sarah home from work because he thought taking the bus wasn't safe. This was before she became pregnant with Patricia. I sat in silence, feeling his words slowly shatter the remnants of my internal world. He brought her expensive gifts. I thought he was just being a generous brother. God, what a fool I was, Uncle Kevin said, his voice trembling. He reached into the pocket of his jacket and pulled out an envelope. His hands shook slightly as he handed it to me. After your post, I couldn't let it go unanswered. I had to know the truth. I opened the envelope slowly. Inside was an official lab report with DNA test results. I collected hair samples from all three of them, Patricia, your father, and myself, he explained. The results were conclusive. The match between Patricia and Uncle Kevin showed 84%, confirming their connection as siblings. But the match between Patricia and my father was 99.99%. Sarah confessed everything, he whispered. They had an affair, for 25 years. Since before Patricia was even conceived. His words hung in the air like a heavy cloud, failing to find a place in my stunned mind. We sat until late into the night, sifting through memories that suddenly took on sinister meanings. My father's special treatment of Patricia, his insistence on driving Sarah to her doctor's appointments, the extravagant gifts that had always seemed odd, all of it now made sense. When Uncle Kevin finally stood to leave, his face was etched with bitterness and exhaustion. "I'm so sorry, Olivia," he said. "I should have seen it. I should have known." I watched him walk away into the rain. His figure seemed broken under the weight of 2 decades of betrayal. For the first time in all of this, I felt no satisfaction in being right. All I felt was a cold emptiness. The morning after his visit, everything shifted. I was still trying to process my conversation with Uncle Kevin when my phone buzzed. A message from Mom. "Olivia, your uncle just left. We need to talk. Can you meet me at Rosemary Cafe in an hour?" I arrived a little early and saw her already there. She sat in the corner, clutching a cup of coffee that remained untouched. Her shoulders were slumped, and her hands trembled slightly. "I filed for divorce," she said as soon as I approached, even before I could sit down. Her voice wavered as though each word was a struggle. "I just got back from the lawyer's office," she added, looking at me with an expression that seemed to plead for support. I sat down silently, unsure of what to say. 25 years of marriage, and I never knew. Or maybe I just didn't want to know, she continued, her voice breaking. Mom lowered her gaze, and I realized Uncle Kevin had told her everything: the DNA results, Sarah's confession, decades of lies and betrayal. "I can't stay in a marriage with a man who has lived a double life," she said, gripping the cup tighter. She suddenly reached across the table and grasped my hands. Her eyes shimmered with tears. "Olivia, I need to apologize to you. For everything. For all these years." I defended him, enabled him. I saw how he favored Patricia and told myself it didn't matter. "I should have listened to you." I shook my head, trying to stop her, but she insisted. "No, let me finish. When you wrote about your suspicions, I was so angry. I thought you were trying to humiliate us, to get revenge. But you were the only one brave enough to speak the truth. The only one who saw what we all should have noticed." Her words hit me harder than I expected. Tears began streaming down my face uncontrollably. We sat in that cafe for hours, talking. It was a slow, painful process of rebuilding something that had been shattered. Mom ordered a bottle of wine, and we shared it as she recounted all the signs she had ignored: my father's late-night errands, his insistent desire to help Sarah, and the strange glances I had noticed but never dared to mention. Later that evening, I was at home, trying to process everything that had happened, when there was a loud knock at the door. I walked over and opened it, only to find my father standing there, his face flushed with rage. "Are you happy now?" he yelled, pushing past me into my apartment. "You've ruined everything. You've destroyed 2 families because you couldn't keep your mouth shut." I stepped back, shocked by his aggression, but my voice remained steady. "I didn't ruin anything," I said, looking him straight in the eye. "You did this. You made this choice 25 years ago. All I did was tell the truth." His face twisted with anger. "I won't be at your wedding," he roared. I stared at him for a moment, then replied calmly. "To be honest, I wasn't planning on inviting you. You haven't been a real father to me for years." He froze for a moment, then snarled through gritted teeth. Then it settled. You're no longer my daughter. A strange calm washed over me. That's fine, I said quietly, offering a faint smile. You have another daughter, don't you? The shock on his face was almost comical. He opened his mouth to say something, but I stepped forward and opened the door. Leave, I said firmly, pointing outside. He stood there for a few seconds, as if expecting me to change my mind. But I stood silently, watching him until he turned and walked out, leaving me standing in the doorway. I quietly closed the door behind him and leaned against it for a moment, listening to the sound of his footsteps fading down the hall. That evening, I picked up my phone and dialed Uncle Kevin's number. My hands trembled slightly as I stared at the screen, watching the digits light up. After a few rings, he answered, his voice tired but warm. Olivia, he said, sounding surprised to hear from me. Uncle Kevin, I began, taking a deep breath. I have a question for you. There was silence on the other end. I gripped the phone a little tighter. Would you walk me down the aisle at my wedding? I finally asked. I heard him clear his throat a few times before he spoke again. Olivia, his voice wavered. It would be an honor. The next 2 months flew by in a whirlwind of preparations. The guest list for the wedding had grown smaller, but that only made the celebration more meaningful. Everyone who attended was someone who had chosen truth over convenient lies. They had supported me when I needed it, and for the first time in years, I felt surrounded by a real family. The wedding day was perfect. The garden where the ceremony took place was adorned with white roses and peonies, filling the air with their delicate fragrance. Mom sat in the front row, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. Her expression was full of pride and relief. When Uncle Kevin approached me and took my hand to walk me down the aisle, I noticed tears in his eyes. He leaned in and whispered softly, "You deserve all the happiness in the world, Olivia." I squeezed his hand in return, feeling our shared past of pain and betrayal fade into the background, making way for a new chapter. Meanwhile, my parents' divorce was finalized surprisingly quickly. Mom later told me that my father had agreed to all the terms, likely to avoid further scandal. They settled everything out of court, and Mom received $200,000 in compensation. A few weeks after the wedding, I was at home, surrounded by thank you cards I was finishing writing. Mom stopped by with an envelope in hand. "I want you to have this," she said, placing the envelope on the coffee table. Inside was a check for the entire compensation amount. "I don't need this money," she said, taking my hand. "But I need my daughter to have the home she deserves." I looked at her, struggling to find the words, but she spoke first. "Consider it compensation for all the years I failed to stand up for you. You didn't let me down, Olivia. I let you down. But now I want to make it right." She smiled, her eyes shining with determination. "Besides," she added with a wry smile, "what better way to use his money than to finally give you what he should have given you years ago?" I held back tears as I deposited the check, and later, when Melvin and I found the perfect apartment, a 3-bedroom space with a balcony, plenty of room to start a family. Every time I open the front door, I'm filled with a sense of justice. As for my father and Sarah, they got married a month ago. I heard about it through family gossip. Apparently, they didn't even wait for the ink on their divorce papers to dry. Their relationship is no longer a secret. Their social media accounts are filled with photos of them as a happy couple, as if the last 25 years of deception never happened. Most of our relatives, even those who initially defended my father, couldn't ignore the DNA results. The truth had put everything into perspective. Now, every Sunday, Uncle Kevin comes over for dinner. He's slowly finding his way back to life, finding comfort in his growing bond with Mom. They've become allies, connected by shared pain. Sometimes, late at night, I think about Patricia. about the fact that she's technically my half-sister. I wonder if she knew, if she ever suspected the truth behind our father's favoritism. But these thoughts no longer keep me up at night. I have my own life now, my own home, built on honesty rather than secrets.